Ralph climbed out of the bathing pool and trotted up the beach and sat in the shade beneath the palms. His fair hair was plastered over his eyebrows and he pushed it back. Simon was floating in the water, kicking with his feet, and Maurice was practicing diving. Piggy was mooning about aimlessly, picking up things and discarding them. The rock pools which so fascinated him were covered by the tide, so he was without an interest until the tide went back. Presently, seeing Ralph under the palms, he came by and sat by him. Piggy wore the remainders of a pair of shorts. His fat body was golden brown, and the glasses still flashed when he looked at anything. He was the only boy on the island whose hair never seemed to grow. The rest were shock-headed, but Piggy's hair still lay in wisps over his head, as though baldness were his natural state, and this imperfect covering would soon go like the velvet of a young stag's antlers. "I've been thinking," he said, "about a clock. We could make a sundial. We could put a stick in the sand and then—" The effort to express the mathematical processes involved was too great. He made a few passes instead. "And an airplane and a TV set," said Ralph sourly, "and a steam engine." Piggy shook his head. "You have to have a lot of metal for things like that," he said. "And we got no metal, but we got a stick." Ralph turned and smiled involuntarily. Piggy was a bore. His fat, his asthma, and his matter-of-fact ideas were dull, but there was always a little pleasure to be got out of pulling his leg, even if one did it by accident. Ralph saw the smile and misinterpreted it as friendliness. There had grown up tacitly among the big uns the opinion that Piggy was an outsider, not only by accent, which did not matter, but by fat, and asthma, and specs, and certain disinclination for manual labor. Now finding that something he had said had made Ralph smile, he rejoiced and pressed his advantage. "We got a lot of sticks. We could have a sundial each. Then we would know what the time was." "A fat lot of good that would do." "You said you wanted things done so as we could be rescued." "Oh, shut up." He leapt to his feet and trotted back to the pool just as Maurice did a rather poor dive. Ralph was glad of a chance to change the subject. He shouted as Maurice came to the surface. "Belly flop! Belly flop!" Maurice flashed a smile at Ralph, who slid easily into the water. Of all the boys, he was the most at home there, but today, irked by the mention of rescue, the useless footling mention of rescue, even the green depths of water and shattered golden sun held no balm. Instead of remaining and playing, he swam with steady strokes under Simon and crawled out of the other side of the pool to lie there, sleek and streaming like a seal. Piggy, always clumsy, stood up and came to stand by him, so that Ralph rolled on his stomach and pretended not to see. The mirages had died away, and gloomily he ran his eye along the taut blue line of the horizon. The next moment he was on his feet and shouting, "Smoke! Smoke!" Simon tried to sit up in the water and got a mouthful. Maurice, who had been standing ready to dive, swayed back on his heels, made up the platform, and then swerved back to the grass and to the palms. And there he started to pull on his tattered shorts to be ready for anything. Ralph stood, one hand holding back his hair, the other clenched. Simon was climbing out of the water, and Piggy was rubbing his glasses on his shorts and squinting at the sea. Maurice had got both legs through one leg of his shorts. Of all the boys, only Ralph was still. "I can't see no smoke," said Piggy incredulously. "I can't see no smoke. Ralph, where is it?" Ralph said nothing. Now both his hands were clenched over his forehead, so that the fair hair was kept out of his eyes. He was leaning forward, and already the salt was whitening his body. "Ralph, where's the ship?" Simon stood by, looking from Ralph to the horizon. Maurice's trousers gave way with a sigh, and he abandoned them as a wreck rushed toward the forest and then came back again. The smoke was a tight little knot on the horizon and was uncoiling slowly. Beneath the smoke was a dot that might be a funnel. Ralph's face was pale as he spoke to himself. They'll see our smoke. Piggy was looking in the right direction now. It don't look like much. He turned around and peered up at the mountain. Ralph continued to watch the ship ravenously. Color was coming back into his face. Simon stood by him silent. I know I can't see very much, said Piggy, but have we got any smoke? Ralph moved impatiently, still watching the ship. The smoke on the mountain. Maurice came running and stared out to the sea. Both Simon and Piggy were looking up at the mountain, and Piggy screwed up his face, but Simon cried out as though he had hurt himself. Ralph! Ralph! The quality of his speech twisted Ralph on the sand. You tell me, said Piggy anxiously, is there a signal? Ralph looked back at the dispersing smoke on the horizon, and then up at the mountain. Ralph, please, is there a signal? Simon put out his hand timidly to touch Ralph, but Ralph started to run, splashing through the shallow end of the bathing pool, across the hot white sand and under the palms. A moment later he was battling with the complex undergrowth that was already engulfing the scar. Simon ran after him, and then Maurice. Piggy shouted, Ralph! Please, Ralph! And then he too started to run, stumbling over Maurice's discarded shorts before he was across the terrace. And behind the four boys the smoke moved gently along the horizon, and on the beach Henry and John were throwing sand at Percival, who was crying quietly again, and all three were in complete ignorance of the excitement. By the time Ralph had reached the landward end of the scar, he was using precious breath to swear. He did desperate violence to his naked body among the rasping creepers, so that blood was sliding over him, and just where the steep ascent of the mountain began, he stopped. Maurice was only a few yards behind him. Piggy's specs, shouted Ralph. If the fire's all out, we'll need them. He stopped shouting and swayed on his feet. Piggy was only just visible, bumbling up from the beach. Ralph looked at the horizon and then up to the mountain. Was it better to fetch Piggy's glasses, or would the ship have gone? Or if they climbed on, supposing the fire was all out, and they had to watch Piggy crawling nearer and the ship sinking under the horizon? Balanced on a high peak of need, agonized by indecision, Ralph cried out, Oh, God! Oh, God! Simon, struggling within the bushes, caught his breath. His face was twisted. Ralph blundered on, savaging himself as the wisp of smoke moved on. The fire was dead. They saw that straight away. Saw what they had really known down on the beach when the smoke of home had beckoned. The fire was out. Smokeless and dead. The watchers were gone. A pile of unused fuel lay ready. Ralph turned to the sea. The horizon stretched impersonal once more, barren of all but the faintest trace of smoke, and Ralph ran stumbling along the rocks, saved himself on the edge of a pink cliff, and screamed at the ship, Come back! Come back! He ran backwards and forwards along the cliff, his face always to the sea, and his voice rose insanely again. Come back! Come back! Simon and Maurice arrived. Ralph looked at them with unwinking eyes. Simon turned away, smearing the water from his cheeks, and Ralph reached inside himself for the worst word he knew. They let the bloody fire go out. He looked down the unfriendly side of the mountain. Piggy arrived out of breath and whimpering like a little one. Ralph clenched his fist and went very red, and the intentness of his gaze, the bitterness of his voice, pointed for him. There they are. A procession had appeared far down among the pink stones that lay near the water's edge. Some of the boys wore black caps, but otherwise they were almost naked. They lifted sticks in the air together whenever they came to an easy patch, and they were chanting, something to do with the bundle that the errant twins carried so carefully. Ralph picked out Jack easily, even at that distance, tall, red-haired, and inevitably leading the procession. Simon looked now from Ralph to Jack, as he had looked from Ralph to the horizon, and what he saw seemed to make him afraid. Ralph said nothing more, but waited while the procession came nearer. The chant was audible, but at that distance still wordless. Behind him, Behind Jack walked the twins, carrying a great stake on their shoulders. The gutted carcass of pig swung from the stake, swinging heavily as the twins toiled over the uneven ground. The pig's head hung down with gaping neck and seemed to search for something on the ground. At last, the words of the chant floated up to them across the bowl of blackened wood and ashes. Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood. Yet, as the words became audible, the procession reached the steepest part of the mountain. In a minute or two the chant had died away. Piggy sniveled, and Simon shushed him quickly as though he had spoken too loudly in church. Jack, his face with clays, reached the top first and hailed Ralph excitedly with lifted spear. "Look! We've killed a pig! We stole up on them, we got in a circle." Voices broke in from the hunters. "We got in a circle, we crept up, the pig squealed." The twins stood with the pig swinging between them, dropping black gouts on the rock, and they seemed to share one wide, ecstatic grin. Jack had too many things to tell Ralph at once, and instead he danced a step or two and then remembered his dignity and stood still, grinning. He noticed blood on his hands and grimaced distastefully, looked for something on which to clean them, then wiped them on his shorts and laughed. Ralph spoke. "You let the fire go out." Jack checked, vaguely irritated by this irrelevance, but too happy to let it worry him. "We can light the fire again. You should have seen us, Ralph. We had a smashing time. The twins got knocked over. We hit the pig. I fell on top. I cut the pig's throat," said Jack proudly, and yet twitched as he said it. "Can I borrow yours, Ralph, to make a nick in the hilt?" The boys chattered and danced. The twins continued to grin. "There was lashings of blood," said Jack, laughing and shuddering. "You should have seen it. We'll go hunting every day." Ralph spoke again hoarsely. He had not moved. "You let the fire go out." This repetition made Jack uneasy. He looked at the twins and then back at Ralph. "We had to have them in the hunt," he said, "or there wouldn't have been enough for a ring." He flushed, conscious of a fault. "The fire's been out an hour or two. We can light up again." He noticed Ralph's scarred nakedness in the somber silence of all four of them. He saw it charitable in his happiness to include them in the thing that had happened. His mind was crowded with memories of the knowledge that had come to them when they closed in on the struggling pig, knowledge that they had outwitted a living thing, imposed their will upon it, taken away its life like a long, satisfying drink. He spread his arms open wide. "You should have seen the blood." The hunters were more silent now, but at this they buzzed again. Ralph flung back his hair. One arm pointed at the empty horizon, and his voice was loud and savage and struck them into silence. "There was a ship." Jack, faced at once with too many awful implications, ducked away from them. He laid a hand on the pig and drew his knife. Ralph brought his arm down, fists clenched, and his voice shook. "There was a ship out there. You said you would keep the fire going, and you let it out." He took a step away. He took a step toward Jack, who turned and faced him. "They might have seen us. We might have gone home." This was too bitter for Piggy, who forgot his timidity in the agony of his loss. He began to cry out shrilly. "You and your blood! Jack Merridew! You and your hunting! We might have gone home!" Ralph pushed Piggy to one side. "I was chief, and you were going to do what I said. You talk, but you can't even build huts, and then you go off hunting and let out the fire." He turned away, silent for a moment, and then his voice came again on a peak of feeling. "There was a ship." One of the smaller hunters began to wail. The dismal truth was filtering through to everybody. Jack went very red as he hacked and pulled at the pig. The job was too much. We needed everyone. Ralph turned. You could have had everyone when the shelters were finished, but you had to hunt. We needed meat. Jack stood up as he said this, the bloodied knife in his hand, and the two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant world of hunting, tactics, fierce exhilaration, skill, and there was the world of longing and baffled common sense. Jack transferred the knife to his left hand and smudged blood over his forehead as he pushed down the plastered hair. Piggy began again. You didn't ought to have let that fire out. You said you'd keep the smoke going. This from Piggy and the wails of agreement from some of the hunters drove Jack to violence. The bolting look came into his blue eyes, and he took a step, and able at last to hit someone, stuck his fist into Piggy's stomach, and Piggy sat down with a grunt. Jack stood over him. His voice was vicious with humiliation. You would you, fatty? Ralph made a step forward, and Jack smacked Piggy's head. Piggy's glasses flew off and tinkled on the rocks. Piggy cried out in terror, My specs! He went crouching and feeling over the rocks, but Simon, who got there first, found them for him. Passions beat about Simon and the mountain top with awful wings. One side's broken. Piggy grabbed and put on the glasses. He looked malevolently at Jack. I got to have them specs. Now I only got one eye. Just you wait. Jack made a move toward Piggy, who scrambled away till a great rock lay between them. He thrust his head over the top and glared at Jack through his one flashing glass. Now I only got one eye. Just you wait. Jack mimicked the whine and scramble. Just you wait, yeah. Piggy and the parody were so funny that the hunters began to laugh. Jack felt encouraged. He went on scrambling, and the laughter rose to a gale of hysteria, and unwillingly Ralph felt his lips twitch. He was angry with himself for giving way. He muttered, That was a dirty trick. Jack broke out of his gyration and stood facing Ralph, and his words came in a shout. All right, all right. He looked at Piggy, at the hunters, at Ralph. I'm sorry about the fire. There. He drew himself up. I apologize. The buzz from the hunters was one of admiration at this handsome behavior. Clearly, they were of the opinion that Jack had done the decent thing, had put himself in the right by his generous apology, and Ralph obscurely in the wrong. They waited for an appropriately decent answer. Yet Ralph's throat refused to pass one. He resented, as an addition to Jack's misbehavior, this verbal trick. The fire was dead, the ship was gone. Could they not see? Anger instead of decency passed his throat. That was a dirty trick. They were silent in the mountaintop while the opaque look appeared in Jack's eyes and passed away, and Ralph's final word was an ingracious mutter. All right, light the fire. With some positive action before them, a little of the tension had died. Ralph said nothing, said no more, did nothing, stood looking down at the ashes around his feet. Jack was loud and active. He gave orders, sang, whistled through remarks at the silent Ralph, remarks that did not need an answer and therefore could not invite a snub, and still Ralph was silent. Not one, no, not even Jack, would ask him to move, and in the end they had to build the fire 3 yards away and a place not really as convenient. So Ralph asserted his chieftainship and could not have chosen a better way if he had thought for days. Against this weapon, so indefinable and so effective, Jack was powerless and raged without knowing why. By the time the pile was built, they were on different sides of a high barrier. When they had dealt with the fire, another crisis arose. Jack had no means of lighting it. And then, to his surprise, Ralph went to Piggy and took the glasses from him. Not even Ralph knew how a link between him and Jack had been snapped and fastened elsewhere. I'll bring him back. I'll come too. Piggy stood behind him, islanded in a sea of meaningless color while Ralph knelt and focused the glossy spot. Instantly the fire was alight. Piggy held out his hands and grabbed the glasses back. Before these fantastically attractive flowers of violet and red and yellow, unkindness melted away. They became a circle of boys round a campfire, and even Piggy and Jack were half drawn in. Soon some of the boys were rushing down the slope for more wood while Jack hacked the pig. They tried holding the carcass on a stake over the fire, but the stake burnt more quickly than the pig roasted, and in the end they skewered bits of meat on branches and held them in the flames, and even then, almost as much boy was roasted as meat. Ralph's mouth watered. He meant to refuse the meat, but his past diet of fruit and nuts with an odd crab or fish gave him too little resistance. He accepted a piece of half-raw meat and gnawed at it like a wolf. Piggy's smoke also dribbling. Aren't I having none? Jack had meant to leave him in doubt, as an assertion of power, but Piggy, by advertising his omission, made more cruelty necessary. You didn't hunt. No more did Ralph, said Pig wetly, nor Simon, he amplified. There isn't more than half a portion of meat in a crab. Ralph stirred uneasily. Simon, sitting between the twins and Piggy, wiped his mouth and shoved his piece of meat over the rocks to Piggy, who grabbed it. The twins giggled, and Simon lowered his face in shame. And then Jack leapt to his feet, slashed a great hunk of meat, and flung it down at Simon's feet. Eat, damn you, he glared at Simon. Take it. He spun on his head, center of a bewildered circle of boys. I got you, meat. Numberless and inexpressible frustrations combined to make his rage elemental and awe-inspiring. I painted my face, I stole up, now you eat, all of you, and I... Slowly the silence on the mountain deepened to the click of the fire, and the soft hiss of roasting meat could be heard clearly. Jack looked around for understanding, but found only respect. Ralph stood among the ashes of the signal fire, his hands full of meat, saying nothing. And then at last Maurice broke the silence. He changed the subject to the only one that could bring the majority of them together. Where'd you find the pig? Ralph pointed down the unfriendly side. They were there, by the sea. Jack, recovering, could not bear to have his story told. He broke in quickly. We spread round. I crept on hands and knees. The spears fell out because they hadn't barbs on. The pig ran away and made an awful noise. It turned back and ran into the circle, bleeding. All of the boys were talking at once, relieved and excited. We closed in. The first blow had paralyzed its hindquarters, so then the circle could close in and beat it and beat it. I cut the pig's throat. The twins, still sharing their identical grin, jumped up and ran around each other, and then the rest joined in, making pig-dying noises and shouting, One for his knob! Got him a fourpenny one! And then Maurice pretended to be the pig and ran squealing into the center, and the hunters, circling, pretending to beat him. As they danced, they sang, Kill the pig, cut her throat, bash her in. Ralph watched them, envious and resentful. Not till they flagged and the chant died away did he speak. I'm calling an assembly. One by one, they halted and stood watching him. With a conch, I'm calling a meeting even if we have to go into the dark. Down on the platform, when I blow it. Now. He turned away and walked off down the mountain.